All right, thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and it's amazing to see so much participation on a PW project that isn't wastewater related. And this is a project that has started in pause, and at this point, we really need to do something about this culvert. So we're really interested in your feedback. I'm Amanda Lima, I'm the town engineer, and I have a great staff with me tonight, both town staff and our consultant. With me, I've got Connor Clifford, who's our civil engineer. We have Mike and Chris from Ty and Bond, and we have Nate and Jeff, our senior project manager and DPW director. And here we're focusing on Thacher and Culvert. We're set up tonight to be hybrid for the Zoom participants, and at this point we're at 17, so we're competing. A really great audience, and we're really excited and eager to go through the history of this culvert. And as we've kind of given in the postcard, we've evaluated some alternatives. Do we think that we'll be exactly on one of them? No, but I think with our feedback that we'll have our a unique approach for this culvert. And we are really excited to get feedback. We're going to have it. I'm going to pass it off to Chris for his presentation. Again, it's being recorded for the Zoom participants. Once he's concluded his presentation, we'll open it for questions on Zoom first, and then we'll conclude the recording, and then we'll open it for the audience here. The camera and the mic is really good, and it should pick up everyone's questions to keep that dialogue moving forward. And then we will conclude questions and answers, and then we're going to open it up to 3 different workshops. And there'll be Post-its, there's red and green, to show what things you may like and what things you may not like and what we can improve on. And then that will be it. We can go home and eat dinner. So again, thank you guys for joining. I'm going to pass it off to Chris here for the presentation.
Great. While we're pulling up the presentation, thank you all for joining here today. As Amanda said, my name is Chris Houle. I'm a senior project manager with Ty and Bond. I work out of our Pocasset office. I also joined here by Mike Larner, who's an engineer as well, for Ty and Bond out of our Harwich office. So we got involved in this project about a year ago. About this time last year, we started with some data collection to investigate what to do with this potential culvert replacement project. And as Amanda alluded to, we are presenting today a slate of options that really kind of span the gamut of what could be done at this time. No decisions have been made, so that's really kind of where we are today. We want to hear from you on these options as to preferences, as you said, things you like, things you don't like, things you like to change, or maybe things that we missed that we want to consider as this project advances through the next phase of design and eventually permitting. So with that, of course, we're at Thacher Shore Road here on the north end of Yarmouth and Yarmouthport. Thacher Short Wharf Creek flows beneath Thacher Shore Road at approximately about the Flintlock Conservation Area, for those that are not as familiar with the project site. The Short Wharf Creek flows to Barnstable Harbor. It's a tidal salt marsh creek. And right upstream of that, or sort of southeast of Thacher Shore Road in this location, is a predominantly a freshwater wetland, but was once a salt marsh. And there are some elements of salt marsh still there, but that is being impacted by the tidal restriction that is in place by the undersized culvert. A little bit of history to touch on the salt marsh component is my colleague Mike found some really good historical photos of the site and dug up some really interesting history here. The Thacher Shore Road was first mapped in about 1907, but historical evidence suggests it's been there as a roadway long before. So there's a few photos that we're kind of calling out here, but one that's I think is pretty interesting here. I'm going to step in front of the camera. Is sort of before or after that we kind of came across by accident. This was our photo from last summer. And then here's a shot from presumably about the same location. You can see the channel in about a similar layout. And you can see in the background, some of the tree stand back in the background. So pretty interesting that we came across that, but it gives you a good sort of before and after of what, or sort of how the site may have changed since that early time period. So the site today, the bottom of this slide here is a image that you may have seen as part of the low-lying road studies that have been done across the Cape by a organization called the Woods Hole Group. And this site was actually studied as part of that. And you don't have to understand everything on the slide, it's not the point, but really what this is showing is where these colored lines are various storm events that of various ranges, going anywhere from a 5-year recurrence interval storm up to about 1,000-year recurrence interval storm. So one that can occur on average every 5 years, or once every 1,000 years. But what you see pretty much across the board is all of those storm events, those coastal storm events overtop Thacher Shore Road in its current form at this location. The road surface right now is about elevation 9.3, and that'll come into play a little bit later in the presentation. And as I sort of said earlier, the Short Wharf Creek is a freshwater stream that flows from the south to the north, or sort of southeast to northwest, and it eventually becomes tidal as it gets down just past, kind of within the project area. So why are we here today? What are we talking about? First and foremost there is a public safety issue at this site in regards to some failing pavement, sinkholes that have formed over time. The road is in poor condition, the culvert is in poor condition, and the town needs to fix it. So that sort of opened up the discussion of, hey, this has been studied for a number of years. Let's think about how we can best manage this for the future. There's other issues as well. The leaning bollards, corroding bollards on the side of the road, kind of shown in this image. There's scour holes, there's sinkholes on top of the roadway that are visible from in the pavement as well as on the side. Riprap that sort of lining the slopes on both sides is failing as well. So the site needs to be repaired. And on top of that, the culvert itself is undersized in its current form. It's about 24 inches. And what I'll show in some slides is that is not sufficient to pass both the freshwater hydrology, freshwater movement that sort of comes from the south to the north, as well as the tide flows that occur to this site twice a day, every day, from Barnstable Harbor and move back upstream. And here's some of those photos kind of touching on that same topic. One thing I didn't touch on is aggressive and invasive vegetation. So tidal restrictions are problematic for a variety of reasons. They degrade salt marshes. Salt marshes are a resource that are dwindling not only in Massachusetts in the Northeast, but up and down both coasts, East and West Coast. Hold on, can we pause for 1 second? Can you ask the Zoom if they they're saying they're not seeing the image. Hi, hold on 1 second. Stephanie, if you would like to unmute yourself, can you not see the presentation? Oh, you're seeing it now. Okay, awesome, great, thank you. Sorry, just wanted to make sure we got you. If there's anybody else on Zoom that is having trouble seeing, feel free to put a message in the chat. Thank you. Salt marshes are degrading across the up and down the eastern seaboard. And with sea level rise, unfortunately, there isn't many places that salt marshes can retreat back to. So you have roadways and buildings and things that get built up right along that shoreline. And one way to address with sea level rise from an environmental standpoint is that salt marshes could migrate up into areas that are, say, other maybe freshwater wetlands, but they can't do that when they're stopped by infrastructure or homes or seawalls, that kind of thing. But you have a unique situation here at this site where there is that sort of brackish freshwater wetland right upstream. So there is an opportunity here to promote salt marsh restoration. in light of sea level rise, and also deal with some of the invasive vegetation that I touched on here. Phragmites is kind of that tall, 8-foot tall plant that you see driving driving around the side of the road. And really the best way to address that is provide salt water or more salt water to it. It's not salt tolerant, and that helps knock it back and bring back some of those more natives. Native, it's like some of the salt marsh grasses. And so just a little bit more in terms of the motivation here. One of the neighboring residents was nice enough to give us a photo on a video back from the March 1st, 2018, of some flooding. And so we understand that you all as residents experience flooding there quite a bit. We have, and this is a little snapshot of that I've mentioned, the road is at elevation 9.3. And this 2018 storm had a high water mark of about 11.2. So not shown in that photo, but you can definitely see Thacher Shore Road is overtopping at this location during the storm event. And with that brings other issues in terms of roadway failure. That's how those sort of scour holes form, the erosion forms, that type of thing. So part of the project is to help address those issues. And of course, reducing flooding risk as part of this project, and certainly not increasing it. I think I touched on everything else there. So when we got involved back in April, Time Bond got involved back in April, we did a variety of different data collection activities, which I'll touch on. We evaluated wetlands, thought about the site from a regulatory perspective. What permits would we need to seek to perform this site? We did hydrologic and hydraulic modeling, which really informed these concept designs, and we'll touch on that a little bit as well. And a big major piece of this project, of course, is public engagement, speaking with all of you and getting your feedback and incorporating that for that next phase of work. Some of the data collection that we did, we reviewed past studies. I got a slide on that which I think you'll find interesting. We did a topographic survey of the whole site, a bathymetric survey within the stream channels. Tidal monitoring. So we had what are called data loggers out to look at how tides behave at the site over about a 40 day period. So, kind of what elevation is water level going up on both sides of Thacher Shore Road in a normal tidal cycle. I talked about wetlands. We delineated wetlands and did an ecological assessment and geotechnical explorations as well to support these future designs. So as I mentioned, this isn't a new project per se for the town. They've been thinking about it and studying it for a while. There was a study from 2012 that was uncovered, which is probably around the time that this project sort of first became at least on the radar from the town's perspective, and a number of other studies, kind of culminating most recently with the Woods Hole Group low-lying road study from last winter about this time, of which Thacher Shore Road was one of many other locations on the Cape that was looked at for this kind of analysis. Topographic survey, so we measured elevations of the roadway, did property line to understand where private property falls, so we could kind of best evaluate how these options may or may not be impacting you as an abutter. And of course, I had mentioned bathymetry as well. So this is a graph slide that I don't need to focus on the details too much, but what this is showing is that tidal data monitoring aspect that we performed. We looked at tides at 3 locations. So essentially the unrestricted tide portion, kind of the Barnstable harbor side of Thacher Shore Road. We had a data logger on the east side of Thacher Shore Road, so the more freshwater wetland side of things, and then a little farther up in the wetland where it becomes, Short River Creek, where it becomes more of a stream channel. And the point of that is we wanted to understand on a regular basis, this sort of 35 day period, how what was the extent of tides and how far up in the system were they getting? And that's what we're showing with this figure. So in the blue in the bottom, you can see we had a full moon, so a lunar tide around April 9th. We had pretty high tidal range going from about elevation 0 up to about elevation 8, which is typical for this, for this region. So that's the unrestricted tide. Just on the east side of Thacher Shore Road, where the culvert is, you can see in yellow how much of a restricted tide range that is. So instead, it only goes from about elevation 3 to about elevation 6. So tidal restrictions, what they do is they inhibit that natural tidal regime and they squash it on both sides. So it brings up the low tide it reduces the low tide, and then it decreases the high tide as well. And then a little farther up in the system, where we'd expect it to be pretty similar again to the unrestricted tide if it was a appropriately sized crossing, we see it even more squished and restricted, and that could be an indication of kind of more restriction through the tidal ditches that sort of go through that property. So long story short is we showed that there's a tidal restriction here, and then we took this information and built it into some of our hydrologic and hydraulic models that sort of inform these concepts. Well, the wetlands regulatory evaluation, the purpose of this was to identify wetlands for permitting, but also identify those vegetation communities that are sort of dominant in the system. Where do we have healthy salt marsh native vegetation? Where do we have invasive Phragmites? And map that. And that's something that would become important as this project moves along, regardless on which alternative if you want to sort of track the improvements to those, removing invasive vegetation or stimulating and encouraging growth of more native salt marsh plants. And it also helps inform sort of how to tackle this project to address some of those key issues that grant agencies might be looking for to help fund this project. And so now to sort of move into the alternatives. So what we have 3 boards out that highlight each of these as well. And so then we'll have the opportunity to sort of discuss this more one-on-one if you want to come and get a closer look at any of the boards. Alternative 1 is essentially replacing the culvert with a more appropriately sized culvert to eliminate that tidal restriction. So that's a 9-foot wide box culvert. That'll restore that tidal regime that I talked about. It'll reduce the amount of times the road will be overtopped, but we aren't addressing the road elevation or anything in this particular alternative. This is really just a culvert replacement to address some of the sinkholes and repair all the issues that are there, but put in a more appropriately sized culvert that will help with some of the ecological side of things.
And just to add too, because if the road overtops, then it takes longer for the water to drain out if it's constrained. This would allow, if the road was to overtop, allow the water to drain better than what it currently would be restricted.
And also I might point out that currently it's a 24-inch culvert. 4.7 by 9.5 is much bigger.
Yeah.
And it would be lower, from my understanding.
Exactly. We'd be lowering it, the invert of the culvert, or the bottom of the culvert down a bit. And we'd also be providing, to Nate's point, what's called more freeboard. So essentially, if there was like a tree or debris that needs to move downstream, like in a rainstorm, we'd be providing more space for that to move through a culvert. And part of the reason for the going up in height.
Can you provide cost estimates for each alternative as you go through?
We'll get to that. Thank you.
Sorry, you said something about not disturbing the asphalt. It sounds like the asphalt's gonna have to come up, make that color work anyway. So there's a rebuild of the road surface regardless.
Yes, so we're not raising the road as part of this alternative, but yes, we would be disturbing the asphalt, repairing the asphalt where it needs to be repaired. And of course, removing that in order to do the project, so put the new culvert in. We'd also be addressing those sinkholes and other issues that are apparent on both sides. And so if you just haven't seen a project like this or want to know what one might look like, there's an example out from Harwich, Red River Beach, very similar in the sense of about a 24-inch reinforced concrete pipe, which we have here. That's a tidal restriction, and then a new concrete box culvert going back in its place. And that's a site you could go drive by and look at if you were interested. So this is an image that we have printouts of these as well. You'll see a version of this same image 3 more times as they go through the alternatives. The take home messages here are that what we want to show is how each of the 3 alternatives may affect water elevations sort of on a regular basis or a flooding basis from like your perspective, maybe as an abutter. And the take home message is that these are all going to be about the same. No alternative is creating more flooding or causing more flooding, but what is happening is, so this black line, the dashed black line that goes around the outer ridge, that's the current FEMA base flood elevation line. So that's where your, say if you have flood insurance, that's the line that they're looking at to determine that. And in no instances are we changing or coming close to, going beyond that black line. The next line is the FEMA 100-year still water elevation. So that's like a coastal flood, but without like waves or anything like that. That's just how much is the tide's going to rise up in a 100-year coastal storm. And that's elevation 10.3. So that's the red line that kind of goes out. And also sort of depicted with this lighter blue patch. So again, we're not impacting either of those for this scenario or for the other 3. But what I want to show is that the difference between these, the next 2 lines, so the orange and the yellow, we have a restricted tidal scenario here at the sort of inner blue at elevation 6.7. So with the tidal restriction on that sort of for the tidal period that we had data collectors out, the highest tide we observed was at elevation 6.7 within this area upstream of Thacher Shore Road. If we were to replace it with a culvert that's 9.5 feet wide, that sort of peak tide, that sort of lunar tide that you'd see, say, once every month or so, that'd be about elevation 7.9. So it will, that sort of regular inundation that you'll see on a daily basis, that will change on a short period, right? To Amanda's point earlier, you'll have more tidal water coming in on that regular basis, but the benefit is that water will leave a lot quicker too. So you won't have it, you probably experience it ponding after some big storms regularly. So that's something that would be addressed here, where it won't be restricted going out and it won't be restricted going in. So that'll help sort of that kind of regular flooding nuisance issues that you might be experiencing. And the last thing I'll mention here.
Can you show me where the culvert is on that diagram?
Yes, I'm sorry. So this is the proposed culvert location, but the existing location is the same exact spot. So the road is, Thacher Shore Road is a little grayed out, but it's about here. Kind of curves around the top of the page. And the last thing I'll share on this slide, if I go ahead, is I'm just going to toggle back and forth. So we have, what I'm showing here is existing conditions with the 2-foot pipe, focusing in on the freeboard column for various storm events, 10-year, 50-year, 100-year storm. We have the road over top for these storm events. If I, with the proposed, oops, broke it.
There you go.
Oops.
Well, you go back. It worked?
I think that was. Oh, I was hitting the wrong arrow. Sorry about that. So what I wanted to focus on here is the freeboard resolid. With those storm events, the road was overtopping or coming close to it, no freeboard. So essentially what I was talking about earlier. But here we have 1.5 or so feet of freeboard. So we have more ability to sort of move water out, move debris out. That won't become as much of a nuisance issue for the town for having to go out and sort of clear some debris jams that might happen with tidal events, storm events.
Is that restricted high tide call out supposed to be pointing to the yellow line?
It's pointing to past the line, but into more just like the blue hatch, really what we're trying to show.
What does the yellow line represent?
That's what I was explaining. Yeah, so the yellow line represents the elevation 6.7. So the call out here is just pointing to the blue hatch, which is represented by that. And then similarly, the orange line or the unrestricted tide elevation 7.9 is the orange line or that space between. That's the take home message here, is focusing in how water level will change from the yellow to the orange hatch.
The Yarmouth Conservation Trust owns the property to the right, the eastern portion. How much higher would the water be at high tide on a normal day?
So about for this gradient area, I can't say like normal day because every tide is variable, but in this instance, for the 30 or so days that we looked at, the highest tide we observed was at 6.7. So we'd be gaining about 1.2 for that highest period. So you'd see a little bit more water coming in on a regular basis, but you'd also be seeing that water leave a lot quicker on a regular basis. Yes.
What would it take to equalize? I'm sort of curious.
Could you explain your question a little bit?
Between the two, you're proposing a 9-foot box culvert now.
Yeah.
It's still restricted on the other side though, right? To a certain degree?
This area here is the unrestricted tide. So
by putting a 9-foot culvert in, is that gonna make it totally unrestricted or is it gonna?
Yes.
Totally.
Totally.
Okay.
Yep.
You mentioned about the phragmites going away.
Yes.
Did you guys look at what would happen to so we almost have a grove of tupelos running along the whole shoreline there? What would happen to those trees?
Like in this region here?
No, and on the top side.
Oh, on the
and
top side.
the road.
Yeah, good question. I'd have to see if I can go back and see if we map those out.
Are the tupelos on both sides of the street, the north and the east side?
No, they're on the south side of the street, eastward, and they're on the east side of the marsh, extending over towards where the creek drains in.
So we did map those out. So we have a red maple, black tupelo swamp, and then it's showing up in a couple areas. So S1, it might spill in a little bit of F1, and then S1, S2, E2, I think. So about these areas, about probably where you're describing. So if I go back to my other slide, are there changes happening over there? Focusing in on the corners, for lack of a better term. So you see a little bit more regular inundation up to that roadway edge, which I think is where you were describing, up in here or up in there. So could there be a change in species composition there? Yes, but not entirely. If you remember that image I just shared, this whole area was mapped as S1 and this whole area was mapped as S1. So there'd be some species change you'd expect. Those less saltwater tolerant species may die off over time, but the ones that are salt tolerant, those would likely continue to thrive. So it'd be transitional,
I guess that's my question. Is it tupelo salt tolerant or are they not gonna thrive?
Good question. I am a water resource engineer, not a plant biologist, so I'd have to take your question into advisement and get back to you. Unless Mike, do you? Yeah, he's an engineer too. So.
I'm coastal guy, so
Yeah,
I know sand. But I have seen tupelos growing pretty close to brackish environments. to the extent that they can handle salt intrusion, I'm not positive. I do know that they do grow near them though, so.
Here's historically, when the road was given to the town by the Thacher family. Do we have any history on how that was dealt with then?
Not in terms of the deed when it was given over,
Meaning culverts, did they have a bigger one or none, or?
that I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, we uncovered a little bit of information as part of this, but we didn't do like an
It's
exhaustive.
been redone a number of times since
Yeah.
I've been here anyway.
All right, well, moving on from alternative 2, so similar option in the sense of the culvert replacement aspect. We stuck with a 9-foot wide culvert. And we went to increasing the height up another 3 feet, which is more than we need, but we did it to kind of make a point. We're trying to show options here that are dramatic to sort of receive feedback, and we can kind of dial them back as needed. But the 7.7 feet comes from the ability to now, under this option, provide more freeboard, more accommodation for sea level rise, because we've taken the road and we've raised it up to elevation 13.2. Elevation 13.2 is an important elevation relative to the surrounding area. It's pretty much as high as you can go to sort of regrade that road and sort of make it still work as a functional roadway and not be problematic for the abutters that have driveways that come off it. Additionally, it is or on the actually along that same line is going, we have with this option, private property impacts and potential resource area impacts, but certainly going above elevation 13.2, that's where the resource area impacts became problematic regulatorily, and became a little bit unreasonable, I think, from a private property standpoint. The elevation 13.2 is also important because it corresponds with that sort of 1,000-year recurrence interval coastal storm event. So 1,000-year storm is essentially one that's going to happen once every 1,000 years. So not really one that one would sort of plan around, but again, to sort of make that point of here's a highest elevation that you could kind of use from a planning perspective.
Chris, how does that compare to the rest of the elevation for the profile of Thacher Shore?
For Thacher Shore Road, well, the best way to sort of answer that question is through how we've reflected the paving line. So what we've had to do to sort of bring everything up to 13.2 is repave and regrade up to, just got cut off, but this is about where there's another driveway, I believe, right at this location. And similarly, there's a driveway to a private residence just beyond that location. So we'd have to raise everything up. And we also need, in order to do that, we have to construct walls. So you'd have a wall up along the coastal side, the Saltmarsh side, because that's regulatory. That's something you can't do, or you can't do easily, is fill Saltmarsh. So we'd have to be avoiding that regulatorily. And then private property impacts potentially to that homeowner to the north, or excuse me, to the north. That is, it's interesting that up there that the road alignment sort of hugs the edge of the right of way in that case. So that would be another area where we would have private property impacts. And then lastly, this driveway here as well, where it'd be rather steep. This driveway is about elevation 8-9. So if we were to raise up the road to 13.2, you'd have to sort of climb up out of that driveway to make that connection. So that'd be another area where we'd have to, chase those impacts back. So, but again, this road raising option is just to sort of be a discussion point where, should the public want to see this road be planned to be accessible in storms well into the future with sea level rise and everything like that, this is kind of the most extreme you could go in that direction.
But this is the relative low point of Thacher Shore, so bringing it to 13 kind of levels it out with the rest. I mean, I know it feels like really flat when you're out there, but the culvert is the low point, so you no longer have that weak part of the road. So if you needed it to use it as egress, If something happened on 6A, which it was noted that it had been used before as a detour route temporarily, then, you wouldn't have this flow point.
Just have one question.
Thanks. Well, if I may just sort of build on Amanda's point real quick, is this map here at the top corner shows those elevations, and Thacher Shore Road to the north and east is up anywhere from 15 to 18. And then similarly down by Flintlock where it starts to get up 15, 16, 18 as well. So that is the lowest point for the area. So we'd have to sort of be bringing it back up to sort of match to the extent we can those grades on either side.
Box culvert the same in both, or are you just adding soil to the pond? In this one,
The box culvert invert elevations, everything
Same.
that's the same. The width is the same. We did add more height just to provide that additional. We went from 4.7 to 7.7, just to provide some additional freeboard, and I'll show you what that looks like in a minute. But again, that's just something for discussion purposes, kind of like what's the extreme of what could be done here. This is alternative 2. So if I toggle back and forth here, this is again existing conditions with a 2-foot diameter pipe. If I focus on the freeboard column, we have negative freeboard, which means we're essentially the pipe is 2 feet underwater in that storm event. Or in this case, we have 3.4 to 3.5 feet above that. So more freeboard for ability to sort of pass debris, et cetera. So back to this slide, same thing as before. Nothing is really changed or modified here, with the exception of Thacher Shore Road now not being grayed in blue, rather being in gray, which means that Thacher Shore Road is now up and above all of these lines that we're reflecting here. The FEMA base flood elevation line of 12, the FEMA Stillwater elevation line of 10.3, and of course the blue hatches. So that's a dramatic option compared to the other. I mean, it'll look pretty different than it does now, but it does sort of accommodate. It keeps the road open, and it plans for the future with sea level rise and all the impacts associated with that. And lastly, maybe why many of you are here today. This was a different option, kind of thinking outside of the box. Here is Thacher Shore Road. It obviously connects to 6A in both directions if you keep going east or west. So this option would terminate at the culvert location. The town is in a unique position with this property because there is town-owned land on either side of the culvert. There's the Flintlock conservation area to the north, and then another town parcel to the south. So this lends itself to exploring that option, where what would it look like if you didn't put a culvert back in, if you took it out and instead you had a slope going down to the sort of open stream channel. But what we are proposing as part of this is to continue to allow pedestrian access and cyclist access as well. I understand this is an important area for cyclists, so the town certainly recognizes the need to keep that open from a recreational standpoint. But again, this would restore the tide conditions and all the other things I talked about earlier in the presentation. But then also, reduce maintenance and long-term repairs that the town may have to do in association with what it takes for maintaining a road and a culvert. The road wouldn't go away. It'd just be a portion of it, about a 30-foot portion or so. It'd be terminating, a little bit offset from that with some bollards and things to make sure it's safe. Nobody drives a car through the bridge or anything like that. We'd be keeping the road at the same elevation, that elevation 9.3, which it is today. The other kind of big element to this that is a little bit different is we would be providing and have to provide turnaround areas primarily for fire truck access, as well as just for the user access, like nicer to have a little bit of space to turn your vehicle around. And so we have just conceptually put in turning just turning areas that sort of work within the site constraints. We looked at a variety of different options. We looked at a circle or roundabout type of thing, cul-de-sac type of layout. We looked at what's called a hammerhead, which is essentially like a T, but neither of those really fit within the site constraints, primarily because of the availability of private property, or excuse me, the availability of public property, but also resource area effects. But that said, this what we've shown here is viable from a like what's required for a turnaround truck for a turnaround for a fire truck. So we mapped that out on both sides. We have not brought this, I don't believe, to any discussion with the fire department yet. Is that?
We emailed the presentation this afternoon.
Okay.
I haven't heard back.
Okay. So that's still something that needs to happen, is that dialogue, should this option move forward for consideration. And yeah, I think that addresses the main points on this slide. From a hydraulics standpoint, the slide, this is just one example of kind of what this, a similar site on Cape Cod that looks like this. This wasn't a public roadway per se, this was more of a trail, but nonetheless, if you wanted a vision in your head of what this could look like, this is an old pipe culvert replaced with a pedestrian bridge with a similar span. Same slide again that you've seen other two times, no changes. This is essentially identical to the alternative one in the sense of how those tide levels may be changing. The only difference is some small changes to the freeboard and hydraulics and stuff, just based on the opening size relative to a pipe culvert.
That's just a planning, the alternative, these, placed in any other, areas like the low areas on Water Street and Mill Lane and Wharf Lane? Or is it just, or another example would be looking at the evacuation routes that were planned out by FEMA, how to get out of Wharf Lane, or any of those things in considered in any of these strategies?
Are those some of the neighboring
Roads, yes.
Yeah, in regards to alternative 3, yeah, you would, there hasn't been anything that's mapped, but again, it would be something that would need to be communicated if there was a palette for that discussion. There is a lot of legwork on the town side too, in regards to abandoning a portion of road. We have explored it, and again, it's more or less to get the feedback of this group, and it would be a lengthy, any of these options are going to be a lengthy process, whether it's permitting, a loan, and then, other things to explore. So not at this time. This is, really just trying to get an idea of what, because we heard two things was, we want to use it for emergency egress, and then it's like, well, we don't want people driving too fast on Thacher Shore. How can you slow down it? We can't cut through, that could cut down on traffic. So it's really, we've heard the two different spectrums. That's why we just came up with.
Emergency egress is the police department issue.
Right, yeah, the police did respond and said that this was their least favorite option.
The emergency plans, you start these things in my home, I have to work. You need to
Flintlock, Flintlock is dead.
Right.
So people coming in, if you're gonna have a
Right.
there, people are gonna be going up that road, it's gonna be that.
Yeah, there definitely would be a learning curve for certain in that, but that's why,
But some rides on that street, they did one of the.
It also impacts gingerbread in a big way with traffic from our area where we live. We have one alternative to exit rather than two. And the exit up Gingerbread and other small roads there, of course, are going to be significantly changed.
Good comments, good feedback. I just have a couple more slides. So I asked just maybe hold those thoughts for now, and we'll wrap up and open it up for more detailed discussion. So somebody asked earlier about costs. This is that summary slide that looks at those 3 alternatives and how much each would cost. Alternative 1, of course, is the cheapest at about 1.1 million. Alternative 2 is the most expensive at about 2.7 million. And then option 3 sort of falls in the middle. One aspect to this is funding availability. Different grants might prioritize different alternatives, so that's something to consider. it's just how much public funding, beyond sort of local funding that might be available for a project like this. And so in summary, Thacher Shore Road, most importantly, is in need of repair. The town does need to do improvements, and they're at a decision point here to make that decision and move forward with your input. They're looking at the three alternatives that I talked about. Wanting to hear your input, both in this setting, but I'm sure, not to speak for Nate and Amanda, but I'm sure they welcome your comments over email as well in the future. And design and permitting, we have some designs done for discussion purposes, but these are really kind of at that conceptual 30% level phase where there's a lot more design work to be done, and permitting as well, which could take, at least a year, if not, 2 or 3 years, depending on funding availability. So, and then if you're wondering about when this project could happen from a construction standpoint, again, subject to funding availability, but a rough timeline, if you want to think about like how much disruption might this be during construction. Pretty similar for all three options, with maybe alternative 2 coming in at the highest, but roughly that 3 to 4 month period is probably a fair estimate at this point, at this early stage. And with that, we will open it to questions, and I think we're doing the online questions first.
Yeah, so that would be good. We'll go over to the Zoom to see if you'd like to just raise your hand, and then I can call on you. Stop sharing our screen here. And there's at the bottom, there should be a raise hand icon.
So you're good. No.
It's the only.
All right, Rick, you can go ahead.
Oh, you can hear me?
I can hear you.
For those in the room,
okay.
so if I would mind just asking to hold your comments for a little bit so we can hear the quick questions online first, and then we'll open it up with this, okay?
Well, I would protest them. Yes.
Hi,
Hi there.
are you ready to, you can hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I'm Rick Binaco. I live on Vesper Lane. I've lived here for 30 years. I walk up and down Thacher Shore often. I actually have pictures of the flood, but my date was different than the March date of 2018. Mine was on January 4th of 2018, and I showed the flooding in the same exact spot. And I also showed flooding. I have pictures of flooding all down Thacher Shore Road and over the single lane bridge between Yarmouth and Barnstable, with water going over the bridge, which leads to my concern about the future and the increase in surges. Having been to Audubon in Barnstable recently and reviewing where the high tide is projected to be in the next 10 to 15 to 20 years, and looking at all of us who are, it's what do we want to accomplish? Do we want to fix it for the future, or do we want to deal with it now? And I understand, and my concerns first and foremost are for the abutters and for the people living closest to it. When I looked at the map that's on Chat GPT from 1880, George Street, which comes off of Church Street, pretty much ended at Thacher Street. At that point, it turned into a dirt road, which was Thacher Shore. But where it went through that area that you're looking at where the culvert is, it was pretty much a mud hole that people had trouble getting through. So if you go back in history, it really was Church Street that went down through George Street, what was George Street, and you would go up to get back to what was then Hallett Street, now Route 6A. The point is that for the future, for the far future, I would think the best alternative, quite honestly, would be to resume that. But I can understand, and I think option number one is probably the best way to go, for a lot of reasons, especially when you talked about an escape route if 6A were to be blocked, and safety reasons and all of that. And also primarily for the abutters and for just ease of living. But I doubt very much any of this will be done in our lifetime. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Great, good time. Anyone else on Zoom?
Everything in town takes 10 years.
All right.
All right, thank you.
Well, thank you all for joining, folks on Zoom. Are we ending this?
We can keep it.
We'll keep it open for the questions.
Yeah.
So we'll keep the Zoom going for a bit for remaining questions and answers. But then we have a kind of a workshop style event, which we will sign off for that on online. So thank you all. Online.
I have a question. You talked about flooding over the road. How many times did you say somebody has acknowledged that it flooded over that part of the
Yeah, we
road?
didn't do a historical record, back keeping of sort of how many times it's flooded. I would probably look to many of you to sort of try to shed some light on that question. We didn't have data loggers out there for anything more than the 35 day period or so. So, we'd have to do a little bit more investigation to sort of answer that question, but I don't know, if anybody want to chime in on that? Yeah.
I'm on the abutting property there, and we've been there for 35 years, and maybe a couple times in 35 years. It's not a frequent event, nor is it in any way problematic in any way. It's just it lasts a couple hours and then it goes away, so don't drive through there and go out the other way. I don't think that that's a legitimate reason to, completely overhaul this thing. And if I may comment for some other reasons, is that I'm a little concerned about what happened on the rest of the road. And I know that's just a matter of opinion, but they came in and put these guardrails along our road like it's some kind of highway, when in fact it's a, old country kind of marsh road with, significant beauty. And I'm concerned that putting in a bridge here with walls on both sides is really going to affect the overall character of that road that's been there for many years. And I would be totally opposed to a raised bridge.
If I can comment on that too, the reason I asked you that question is we own that property where the culvert is. We've owned it for over 20 years.
Okay.
Anytime there's been a storm, a significant storm, we have gone out and I've only seen it flood once.
Me too.
And once I picked up a bird and took it to a wildlife place because it was floundering in the water. Once is all I've seen it.
We've been there longer than both of those by a good amount, 40-something years, almost 50 going on. I've seen it once. I could be mistaken. It might have been twice, but again, like the gentleman said, 2 hours later, it's done.
Oh, yeah.
If I can continue, one more short question. You mentioned in number 2 of how high you were gonna raise the road. I forget the number. That's
13.2, so roughly 3.9 feet above its current elevation.
But
That's
can it
alternative.
be in the middle somewhere where you're not going so drastically and affecting the area so much?
Yes, it could. I mean, we chose to go to 13.2, as I said earlier in the presentation, to sort of, for discussion purposes, to gain that feedback. That's pretty much as high as you can go. So if anybody in the room really likes option 2, we've eliminated the sort of follow-up question to that of can you go higher than 13.2? The answer is no. So that was the point of that. The town will take your comments into advisement as to if the option 2 seems like there's a lot of interest around that one, then that will be then further explored as part of the next design phase as to maybe it's not 9.3, it's not 13.2, but like you said, maybe it's somewhere in between.
So but in option 1, you don't have to have the walls, you can leave it the way it is now.
Yeah, option 1, we would not be changing anything other than the culvert itself, which would, there'd be head walls and wing walls that look a little bit different than what you see now, but for the most
Not like
part.
we see on Thacher Road now, no.
Well, that was my question. Are you proposing the same wooden rails here?
I've heard a little bit of it.
I mean, they came on without anybody knowing what was happening.
We did do mailers to all the abutters that did a postcard. And our Kevin Morrissey, our inspector, went out and talked to a handful of neighbors that were impacted, whether it was on Wharf or Thacher. The concrete bollards are a huge hazard. They're known for if you get into an accident, they can penetrate. And it was, our direction is to remove those. I mean, they were hazardous with the rebar. They are not recommended to put back in place. If you go down Buck Island, there's, steel guardrails. So when we had conversations, wooden guardrails is the safest hybrid of in between. So again, when they were installed, the butters that came out were really happy because what was there was decrepit, and especially on Wharf Lane, you could pretty much, fall right over the edge if you just touched them. Because I think someone put 2x4s on them. So again, we can't appease everyone with those. And again, we're trying to, come to the middle in regards to this. We haven't talked about treatments at all for this portion of it. But yeah, those are kind of where that was.
Yeah. So just to follow up on that, I mean, the bollards that I showed in the photo are just probably, sounds like just the other ones are deteriorating, are a safety hazard as they are now. But certainly upsizing a culvert is gonna have a head wall and a wing walls and things that will be exposed, and those can become safety hazards too for drivers. If one were to drive into that, they could damage their vehicle or themselves, but then also damage the investment of the community. So that's part of the reason for having some sort of protection there, but as Amanda pointed out, hasn't really been discussed in any level of detail.
So we can envision either wood or steel guardrails. I don't know yet.
I don't think there would be a need for steel guardrails.
Okay, just
Yeah,
want to understand.
it would be likely to transition the wooden guardrail.
We have wooden guardrails in this plan, as of right now, but again, we're at an early phase and.
Thacher Road is a scenic roadway.
Just explain to me one more time why we want to open that culvert up. What's wrong with as it is at the moment? The river, the creek that's up there just runs down and it goes out because it goes dry. So why do we want to open it up?
Yeah, well, I think I touched on that quite a bit in the beginning of the presentation. A variety of environmental benefits associated with increasing the called hydraulics, allowing tidal flow to come back into the environment.
I don't understand why you want to do it.
Yep. And then the other piece to that is the ponding standpoint, flooding standpoint. So if you have the road over top or you have a tidal event, the water cannot leave the marsh area on the east side of Thacher Shore Road as efficiently. So that can create problems as well.
As I said, that happens every 20 years, which is not a real big
problem. Well, no,
no,
just on every tidal cycle, you have water that comes in on every tide cycle and it can't get out as efficiently. Yeah. And so there's a variety of reasons I touched on. I don't want to take too much time and rehash on that.
But it does get out. It can run out through the 2-foot pipe.
So if I remember right, the last repair was
2018.
Yeah, not that long ago, and it's already eroding again.
Right, it was
Without a
not,
box culvert, it's gonna keep doing the same. That's what you're saying.
Right, and then also it wasn't a, pipe, replacement, it was a patch replacement.
So you're gonna keep doing the same thing if you don't change the design.
Right, and you can see that there is a sinkhole at the surface now. We're monitoring it, making sure that, the road is safe to go on, but there, has been, shows of deterioration that.
Clogging maintenance, that's an issue, is that pipe can clog and flood and then, clog and cause lead to more flooding. That's one aspect.
I'd also like to add to that, mosquito control is a big issue here on the Cape right now, and standing stagnant fresh water is a mosquito's best friend. So tidal flushing and reopening a lot of these systems is an environmental way to help sort of eliminate mosquito breeding grounds. And Massachusetts Mosquito Control is doing a lot of projects similar to this in other areas where they'll even dig ditches or runnels in some of these areas to promote the drainage.
Yes, this is a pretty common.
The town doesn't own that land that the creek goes through. We do.
I don't have it up anymore, but we did a property line survey of the project for the roadway to establish where the roadway right of way is.
Yeah, I'm not talking
And-
about the roadway, I'm talking about where the creek comes. We own that.
And
Yes.
what I'd like to know is what increased level of water in the southern side, the freshwater side, what will that level be after you open it up to 9 foot by 4 foot?
This one, sure.
Yeah, that was the, actually, I have the handouts around, so you can go grab one of those if you wanna look at that later. That difference is approximately for that highest tide that you see on a monthly basis is about up to 1.2 feet. So that's what we're depicting here with this figure. There'd be more regular inundation to that elevation, but you'd also see less regular inundation for the duration of time that it is currently flooded or underwater. There was a few questions I got cut off, so I want to circle back around to.
Thacher Road
Yeah.
is a scenic roadway. It's
Okay.
one of 12 in Yarmouth. There's 5 pages of considerations of scenic, you can have them.
Okay.
I don't know if you've read these considerations for scenic roads, but it is a designated scenic road in Yarmouth.
Yeah, I had a preliminary conversation with Kathy in regards to a certain amount of tree removal that triggers it, but we're happy to go in front of, whatever boards in
Yeah.
regards to this. I mean, it's same with Old Kings, it's not eligible because it's not a parcel, but we'll have conversations with Old Kings as well, so.
Yeah, no matter what alternative gets selected, there's going to be a lot more opportunity for public outreach. There'll be regulatory hearings as part of that, so the Concom or eventually the Scenic Road Committee, if you look it up, so plenty more opportunity for public comment.
Thank you.
If we go with alternative number 3, the thing that I thought I heard was that there'd be turnaround areas before the bridge and after.
Yes, so we would be, for the one to the north, I didn't highlight this when I spoke, but the one to the north is essentially reutilizing the existing parking area that's there now for Flintlock Conservation Area. So not a huge change there, might just be on the north side, yeah.
Right.
But just maybe a slight reconfiguration. The south side, we would need to provide a turnaround there, and the best spot for that is there's a lawn area a little bit before you get to the end. So that'd be the most logical area with available.
My home is on the end of Flintlock. There's a delightful cul-de-sac at the end, which is fine, except people mistake the fact that they can reach 6A by running up the hill. So, speaking personally, just myself, living on Flintlock for the past 34 years, there's enough mess of traffic with just that, let alone bringing in the possibility that there'd be a turnaround area in front of there. And I just don't, I'd be woefully opposed to item 3. An alternative 1, being an old Yankee, well, kind of like an old Yankee, maybe a middle-aged Yankee. Alternative number 1 is the most appealing because it seems to be the least invasive. We're discussing, we're not voting, right?
No, well.
Yes, and I think it sounds like kind of the questions now are really, our goal now is to like break up into workshops for the 3. One thing I wanted to note is that there was a sign in when you walked in, if you could please sign in, so then we can correspond via email or phone. And you can circle whichever is the best way to contact. For that would be really key. But I think we can conclude the Zoom portion of this meeting and then work into the workshop to get into those nitty-gritty details. I think that would be really effective.
I've got my hand up for a while.
Oh, yes.
I just have one question. The one time that you had a photo of the road flooding in 2018, did anyone try and correlate that time to any 25 or 50 or 100-year flood?
I did, it was a 100-year flood, because that's why we went out and looked at it again. We only saw a small
That's my
amount.
question, because based on that, I think number 1 is the best option. If that's a 100-year flood that ran over in 2018.
Yeah,
The other thing,
I'm not sharing anymore.
I'm curious, is there gonna be another meeting, or is this gonna be it?
everything's gonna flood it.
I think for this phase of the project, it's in the sense of, the point of today was to gather that feedback. And then the town will assess with the town of how to then move forward for the next phase of design. So, so yes, this is the only public meeting for this phase of the project, but there's a lot more planning and design underway. Rick, I'll take your question next, but I do want to just pull up this slide to get to
A happy medium.
early question. So that storm in that image, the elevation of the documented, well-documented peak elevation of with that 2018 storm was 11.3, I believe. And this is a figure from the Woods Hole group that we're sort of repurposing for this presentation. And if I look at elevation 11, which is about here, I believe, that it corresponds with about the 2% recurrence and also about the 50-year storm based on 2030.
I think this would be interesting for others to think about as well. The road surface is less opportune than a macadam type real surface. And that might erode easier if there was any water sitting on that culvert area. So maybe if you're gonna, when you repair the road there, putting in a standard type surface.
Yeah, there's
would
like
be
3 layers of
wise.
seal on that.
Shipping oil right now.
Shipping oil, yeah.
Good comment. Rick, I promised you a question, so.
Thanks, Chris. One thing that hasn't been discussed is that it's irrefutable that sea level rise is accelerating way beyond our initial predictions were. So the implications of this need to be looked at from that perspective. Well, I think.
Yeah. 100%. Thank you, Rick. So yeah, in the more sort of detailed analysis of this, and we can't cover all the points today, but all of our modeling does incorporate sea level rise for various storm projections. There's typical projections for 2030, 2050, 70 and beyond. So we sort of our analyses present all that, but to Rick's point, all 3 options are thinking about this site relative to that inevitability. That sea level is rising. So there's a question earlier, why can't we just keep it the same? Well, there's already issues there. Replacing in kind doesn't make sense logically for the site, but certainly in light of that inevitability. Nate, you okay.
I live on Flintlock, but I'm also the town moderator, so I'm not gonna take a position. I would encourage people to follow this. This is great, but this ultimately could go to a town meeting, $2 million project. So I would strongly encourage, somebody said this might not happen in our lifetime. It depends on, I guess, how long we all live. Probably in a couple of years, you know, the voices here really should be heard. So I encourage that, because sometimes we don't follow the process from the beginning to that meeting.
Right.
And so I guess, you know, I'm soliciting. And I have to give kudos to this group. The DPW is probably the most efficient department we have in the entire town. Keep it in mind.
I'll take yours next.
Yeah. Is there a happy medium item on alternative number 1? I mean, could you go a little higher without creating?
On alternative 2, you mean?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, just a little bit higher without having to build a seawall.
No, he meant alternative.
1, alternative 1.
Like a hybrid.
You get
Keep it the
10.5
size of
without putting
1
Yeah.
and then.
Without putting a seawall in, can you raise it a little bit more, the road?
There is a little bit more elevation that can be gained without adding significant walls.
I mean, that would make sense, I would
We started to explore that a little bit, but you know, like I said, we decided to go with that sort of more extreme to sort of paint that picture of like, if you choose this is kind of what it could be. So maybe that's something that comes out of that, you know, in future discussions with the town. Maybe they settle on something like 12 or 12 and a half or somewhere in that ballpark where, but we didn't do exhaustive analyses on.
Yeah, right. They did extremes.
Can I, question kind of directed to town folks there. When I hear about a project like this, and everything today costs $2 million, it seems, or more. As the information is collected, is there any kind of determination or judgment about where a project like this fits in comparison to other areas in the town that also need attention? So that it's not either leapfrogging some of those things, but there's some kind of order or organization connected to it all. Is there a comprehensive plan with something? This has been on the books, I guess, for 15 years. And things do move slowly, but is there any kind of an overarching kind of a plan regarding where, if we do get an approval for this, we do get the ducks in a, where does it fall in terms of something else that's existing in the town is also going to cost $2 million? Is that maintained? Is that built? That type of a plan?
So there's two funding sources Ken had mentioned going through town meeting. And you can vet through, the capital budget process. But there's also state funding that was allocated on an annual basis based on our road miles. And that's what we use to repair the culverts on Siegel Road. And as of right now, that would be, our intention. So then that's what, and again, that also gets shared with the capital budget, but it's something that DPW manages that money and how it's allocated. So as part of that, our question is like, how does this compare to the other culverts in town?
Yeah.
So we've been developing, kind of getting that inventory of all of our culverts because we really don't have an inspection up to date. The guardrails were the first inspection that we did a couple of years ago, and culverts are now on the list. So again, so that we know because we're, highway is our eyes and ears. So, them going out there and seeing the sinkhole, same with Siegel culverts, the two that we replaced on Siegel Road. They know it's a high priority, but we don't know, one's on Winslow Gray compared to another area, Park Ave. Those we don't know the, priority yet at this point. So those are definitely in the works. And again, this is because it's showing, the physical deterioration. That, for us right now, we want to get ahead of it because we don't want to be in an emergency permitting and procurement set because that makes it very expensive and on both ends.
Okay, thanks.
All right, last question, then I think we're going to transition.
Yes, my name is Lee Marshall. Before you break into these workshops, before people start to leave, I would suggest that you maybe take a show of hands to see how all these folks feel on each one of the three proposals. So you'll have that good feedback.
Yeah, I mean, we can definitely do that. Part of the workshop thing that I was going to lead into in the second year is we want that information. We were going to ask to record it in a slightly different way. We have stickers and notes and so, but that said, I mean, I'm open to doing it.
It's just hard for the Zoom participants to do that, but.
Forgive my cut, English isn't my first language. Was that a yes?
And again, it's not a popularity vote either, it's like general consensus, so we're happy to. We're happy to take more of that.
Okay, hands up, ask the questions. Ask the questions.
All right, so, sure, why not?
So
I mean, I'm really excited for all this output, we got lots of other
is that a
projects.
question or a raising hand?
Well, just a quick point. I think option 1 and 2 are very similar, except there's a road issue with option 2. So incrementally, can't you do option 1 up front and then decide after that to see what's happening with sea rise and how much more feet you want or whatever? So that's like an incremental step. So option 1 seems to make sense. Option 2, we can wait and see. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely something the town could consider as part of their planning if they wanted to go there.
Mr. Culvert would be the same.
Yeah, I think the hard part is just the cost
How much.
and how much cost, inflates over time, so if you did a project, even if you take the same project and you broke it into 2 phases, it's gonna cost more to break it into 2 projects compared to doing it at one time. Never mind if you do that second phase 10 years down the road. So it is, but it's something that can be explored.
Another important consideration too is if resurfacing of the road falls into the grant funding that might be available for the culvert replacement, then that saves the taxpayer dollars in terms of paying for it. Whereas if you phase it out, it might come out of the town's budget to do that. So generally, if things like that can be grouped together, it sometimes can be a cost-effective way to do it.
Not to speak for the town, but I think that grant fundraising has been a key point of the discussions that we've had over the last year. What options would be available for what grant program? So I think that's something that the town is thinking about and would want to build into this, considering any option is relatively expensive, so $1 million plus. So on that note, before I would take a vote, for the folks that are on Zoom, if you wanted to put into the chat your alternative number that you prefer, we'll be able to record that as part of this, and then with that we can open up to if anybody prefers alternative, does anybody prefer alternative 1?
Sorry, 1?
Much earlier?
Raising the road another foot or so with option 1, I think that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that we definitely owe exploring what we can fit within the footprint that's there without, impactful walls.
I'm gonna switch it up. Anybody want to see alternative 3, so the road termination option and the pedestrian bridge?
Option 3?
Anybody? Not one? I saw half a hand.
Why not?
Yeah. We got 1 vote for option.
I'm alive, Joe.
Yeah. And option 2, alternative 2, which is the road raising option. So same culvert, but bringing the road up to a higher elevation.
If I ask one question about option 2, is there not a possibility of doing option 2 without raising the road? Expanding the culvert to the larger size?
Well, the big difference from 1 to 2, so 1 is a new culvert. Option 2 is pretty much the same culvert.
No, it's not.
It's
a much bigger culvert.
slightly taller, yes, taller but same width.
Wider.
Not wider, no.
Well, I saw on your picture showed a wider one.
The picture was an example from another site. So alternative 1 is replacing the existing 2-foot diameter reinforced concrete pipe with a 9.5-foot wide concrete box culvert. That is, I think, 4.7 feet tall.
Sorry if I'm.
That's okay, not a problem. So alternative 2 is essentially using the same structure, slightly taller, for a little bit more freeboard, because it's raising the road up to 13.2. So to somebody's question earlier, is there something between alternative 1 and alternative 2? Certainly, but again, we wanted to give the spectrum here for discussion. We couldn't come to you today and present 50 options, so we need to narrow it down. So.
There's just a comment, we have a couple 1s on the Zoom, and then M. Robertson said more research is needed on all and environmental impacts.
Just in terms of regulatory permitting on the environmental impact study question I had a slide that sort of outlined the likely process for the permitting process for any of these options. Each one, slightly nuanced, but for the most part, yes, there'd be a whole range of state, local, and federal permits that will be involved for all 3 of these options.
At this point, I'm gonna end the Zoom and the recording. For those who couldn't join or will watch later. I'll do the workshops.